Welcome to the Vet Med Wellness and Leadership Podcast, where we discuss central challenges vet med leaders face, such as burnout, stress, and difficult interactions with clients and staff, just to name a few. In each episode, you will hear about actionable solutions that you can apply to your practice and invitations to connect with fellow leaders who are passionate about improving the wellness of the vet med profession. By subscribing, liking, commenting, or sharing this podcast, you are helping more veterinary professionals find the resources shared in these episodes. Thank you in advance for listening and supporting this show. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody. Crystal Stokes here, and joining me today is Dr. Marie Holowaychuk, who's a board-certified small animal emergency and critical care specialist and a passionate advocate for veterinary team well-being. She's also an avid writer, podcaster, and researcher, and she has authored dozens of articles and recorded a multitude of podcast interviews related to personal and professional well-being. She also hosts the Reviving Vet Med podcast, so shout out there, be sure to check it out, and writes a monthly blog and newsletter on pertinent issues related to veterinary mental health and well-being. Great resource for everybody to look into. So Marie lives in Calgary, shout out to Canada, where she occasionally locums as a private referral practice and as a specialist teleconsultant. As a yoga and meditation teacher and wellness coach, she facilitates well-being workshops and retreats for veterinary clinics and organizations, and offers individual and group coaching and online programs for veterinary team members. She recently launched a new website, and I will put that in the show notes, which is Reviving Vet Med, containing well-being resources for veterinary professionals. And today, we are going to learn all about the surprising research and benefits of mindfulness and meditation, as well as practical ways busy vet med professionals can begin to incorporate some of these practices into their daily lives. So Marie, thank you for being on with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
Fabulous. Well, I wanted to start off with your full circle story. That's always a theme here. And to give those listening a little reminder, the full circle journey is where many of us have experienced this. We enter into our careers full of passion and energy and vigor. And then along the way, things happen, life happens, and we may find ourselves drained, burned out, losing that passion, feeling apathetic, and just lost. And then somehow we find our way through it. Whether those are resources, people, mentors, personal practices, and we may reconnect with our passion in a way that we didn't expect. And I think that I know your story and you have some really interesting twists and turns. And I was hoping we could start there today as an entry point for the topic of meditation and mindfulness.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'm glad that we're able to start, with the journey, because I do think it gives important context for, where a person has landed today in what they're pursuing. And I had, a bit of a unique start in that I was raised by two veterinarians as parents. So my parents met and got married in vet school. And afterwards, my mom opened up a small animal practice in the town where we grew up. And my dad worked in regulatory medicine. So he worked for different government agencies throughout his career. And from as long as I can remember, I spent time in my mom's companion animal practice, doing everything in the practice, everything from kennel attendant to, tech assistant, vet assistant, reception team member, etc. And I loved all of it. And I always thought that I would go into my career as a veterinarian in my mom's practice. And I would, take over the practice and live out my career there. And, as I progressed in my veterinary school and I started learning about referral medicine and specialty practice and, different board certifications and these different types of things, I started to feel like, maybe there's something more for me out there. And so I made the decision in the fourth year of my veterinary school, rather late, honestly. It was pretty close to the match due date, but I made the decision to apply for an internship. And I ended up matching at Washington State University, which is where I did a small animal medicine and surgery rotating internship. I loved it. It was so much fun. And I especially loved emergency medicine. I loved my emergency rotations. I loved the autonomy and the thrill of working alone and in a very high-paced environment. And my mentor was an emergency and critical care specialist. And I just really connected with her. I developed a passion for reading and research. And it was a no-brainer for me to apply for residency programs during my internship. So then I matched in North Carolina. Of course, we both have a very strong affinity for North Carolina. And I spent 3 years in Raleigh at NC State doing my residency. And again, I loved it. And it was very clearly the right choice for me as far as specialty goes. And from there, I just really grew a love of teaching and mentoring. And again, additional research, writing, learning, growing, pushing the edges of the envelope, and was always looking to do better and bigger things in veterinary medicine. And so it wasn't any big surprise from there that I applied for academic jobs at the end of my residency. And I looked at a few different positions in the United States, but ultimately as a Canadian, I felt pulled, to go back across the border. And so I took a job as an assistant professor at the Ontario Veterinary College. And it was amazing. It was, honestly, at that point in my life, it was my dream job. It was a wonderful combination of time in the clinics, mentoring interns and residents, looking after cases, as well as off-clinic time when I would do research and teaching and mentoring graduate students and summer students. And I loved it. And it drove me to accomplish so many amazing things in my career, from a research and teaching perspective. And at the same time, it also led to some challenges mentally and physically. So I started to experience symptoms now looking back retrospectively, what I know to be burnout. And at the time, I just didn't know what was happening. I knew that I was it didn't feel right. It didn't feel sustainable. I was starting to have feelings of frustration and cynicism and just feeling emotionally exhausted and like I had nothing left to give. And I wasn't doing all the things I do today, from a wellbeing advocacy perspective. So I, didn't know what self-care was. I wasn't practicing meditation. I wasn't staying mindful, of myself and everything else. And so long story short, just this feeling of this isn't sustainable led me to believe that somehow I wasn't cut out for this job or that this job wasn't quite right for me and that, all could be fixed if I just moved to a different job and fled the area, moved across the country back home to where I grew up. So that's what I did. I gave a long notice so that they could hopefully fill my position. I had some graduate students that I was taking care of. I felt badly leaving all of my academic obligations. And at the end of the day, I guess I felt like I was doing what was best for me. But I ended up leaving with no job because there were no jobs really for me at that time in the area that I wanted to live. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to make this happen on my own. I will continue to work as a criticalist. I will just do it as a locum and I will continue to educate, but I will do it as a public speaker at conferences and so on. And I will continue to write. I will just won't be doing research with research grants. I'll be doing research in other ways. So I had all these big aspirations of making things work and making ends meet. And it was 100% more challenging than I ever thought it would be. This was back in 2014 when we didn't have the shortage of specialists and veterinarians that we have today. We were really at a steady state. In fact, in 2013, 2014 was when there was all this talk in the US of we have too many vets. All of these vets don't have work and they all have these huge student debts and they can't pay it off. So very different climate than we're in now. And that, led me to fall into a deep depression and additional burnout because then I was working much, much harder to build up my business, to find work, to make a name for myself, to reestablish myself in this new role, which again, at the time, it was, there weren't locum specialists. This was a very different, different, time than we have today and different roles than we have today. And so it's not surprising that I, again, developed a lot of the same things that I was experiencing when I was, at the Ontario Vet College. And it was ultimately, I remember the day very clearly. It was a day that I was running around. I had been away for speaking and was going away to do another speaking engagement. rushing to do all these appointments and get all these things done before leaving. And I was in a car accident. And the car accident really served like a physical and metaphorical wake up call to like, this is not working for you. Like you need to seriously stop and look at what's happening. Because, you're moving down the path of this is not sustainable anymore. And it was from there, Crystal, that I just like started to look really deeply at my well-being, at my mental health, and to get the help that I needed and to change these patterns and habits that were so deeply ingrained in myself, and to really educate myself on mental health and well-being and self-care and mindfulness and all of these important topics to really, have the sense that I could take care of myself.
Oh, I love this story. And I mean, so many people can relate. I can relate very deeply to this. And what I find so interesting about these stories is how I always find myself wishing if only our younger self could know what the older self knows about the value of that self-care and understanding, mental health and how we operate. And it's strange to me that we don't just include this in like our middle school, course curriculum, that it's not just taught. It's something that would set us up for so much more success in a sustainable way that also feels good. Because I think that most of us in our younger years, you look at that period of the early 20s, for instance, or even in high school, I think a lot of us had that attitude towards ourselves of like whipping the horse. Harder, just push yourself. Come on. Don't be a wussy. Who cares if it doesn't feel good? Just try harder. There's no self-compassion. There's no introspection. It's just like we sort of grind and grind and grind until there's nothing left. And then that sense of, oh boy, I think I'm hitting the bottom of something. This does not feel good. And I would love to have us not have to go through this circular journey of hitting the bottom. It'd be nice to prevent that. But I think that's something we're going to talk about today, which is, you discovered how impactful, for instance, meditation and mindfulness are. That's just one of the tools that you used when you were in a painful place. But what would your younger self have said about that? If somebody had told you, 5 or 10 years prior, hey, you should really try meditation or a mindfulness practice might be helpful, you may have laughed. Like, what do you think you would have said?
Oh my gosh, I would have laughed for sure. I mean, I remember, finishing up vet school and that was kind of like when yoga was starting to get more mainstream. And I'm dating myself here, but I graduated from vet school in 2004. So, it was in the early 2000s. And I remember going to a couple of yoga classes and I was like, what is this? Like, this is not exercise. It's a waste of my time. I'm not even sure I sweat. I feel super awkward. They're telling me to breathe and then we lay on our backs and we just sit there. Like, I don't have time for that. So if someone had told me, to sit in meditation and, notice my thoughts and let them go and whatever else, I honestly would have thought, like this is malarkey. And so it is interesting. And yet, fast forward to this time in my life where, I was feeling so depressed and so defeated and so burnt out and just so disconnected from myself. It was actually my physician at the time who said to me, like, have you ever considered a meditation practice? And I was like, no, like that's not, and at that point I was practicing a little bit more yoga. So I was like, well, like I do a little bit in Shavasana at the end of yoga class. And, some of our teachers do it more than others and whatever, but that was the extent of it. And she suggested to me doing an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And, I looked into it and there was solid research behind it, even at that time, like decades ago or close to, a couple of decades ago. And so, yeah, I kind of needed a little bit of a push from a healthcare professional and something with a bit of research behind it. And it just was like, was so lucky and coincidental that there was a mindfulness-based stress reduction program for professionals being offered, in the city that I was living in at the time. And so I jumped on it. I applied and they accepted my application, and I was the only veterinarian within a group of about 30 professionals. So they were mostly psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, physicians, a couple of lawyers, and maybe a few social workers in there as well. But it was transformative for me. Like the 8 weeks, I changed as a human, and my whole perspective on meditation and mindfulness changed as well.
What an important turn of events. I don't know if you were doing the same one I was trained in. I was trained on the program by John Kabat-Zinn. Is that the one you did? Yes. So that one has so much evidence. And what we notice is, I think for those of us who are in the medical field, we love evidence-based things. We do not want woo-woo anything. It needs to have evidence and data. And the fact that they have so robustly built that program and it's being used for so many different things like pain management. It's being used by physicians. It's being used by people who need to see the evidence. And I think that physician must have seen something in you and known that'd be a good starting point for you. And tell us more about, let's just keep progressing through that full circle story. And there's a little bit more to it that kind of, obviously you're a passionate advocate now. So are there a few more steps that kind of got you over the hump to really buy in and start wanting to not only practice it, but teach it?
Yeah, such a good question. So, at this point, it wasn't even on my radar to think about advocating or sharing with others about this information. I was focusing on my own healing journey and, taking better care of myself. And so it started with the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Once I received, the medical settlement from the car accident, because it wasn't my fault. And so there was some compensation there. I used some of the money to do a yoga teacher training program. So I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training. I said to myself, how can I use this money to just really reinvest in myself and treat myself? And I probably, in hindsight, could have gone to some exotic location and, done it there. But I did it in Calgary. There was a studio that I had been attending for more regularly, really, since my meditation and yoga practice had picked up. And they had, a call one evening for anybody who's interested in our yoga teacher training this summer, come to an information session. And I was like, oh, that might be interesting. Again, doing this not as an intention to teach yoga or whatever. I thought, what a gift to myself to really deepen my practice and learn more about yoga and be in this incredibly supportive, like-minded space, for this period of time, and give myself the gift of taking some time off, to rehabilitate my body, to, all of these things. And so I did that. And it was during that training that I really dove even more deeply into what is needed for healing, what is needed for self-care, what is mental health and well-being. And obviously I'm just scratching the surface at this point. But I started reading a lot of books, some research articles, doing my own research per se, listening to different podcasts. I made plans to attend the National Wellness Institute conference in the US that summer as well. And I just started really looking at, what does the research show? How are caregiving professionals meant to take care of themselves to prevent things like burnout and compassion fatigue and so on. And it was during that teaching, towards the end of my yoga teacher training, that I was like, oh my gosh, this has been transformative for me. This combination of knowledge and physical practice and understanding and being in the right place and mindset to be able to receive this information. I feel like we need this in our profession. And this was at a time where, we were talking more about veterinary suicide. We were talking more about some of the distress, experiences within veterinary medicine. And so I thought, that's all fine and good. Everybody's talking about what's wrong and, all of the bad things and the statistics and so on. I have yet to see anyone tell me information about how you can better take care of yourself and what can we do and what does the research demonstrate as far as tools and strategies. And so that really led to this idea of me bringing those tools and strategies to veterinary medicine, things that I had researched and applied to my own life and had seen my own experiences with in a positive light, and making it relatable and practical and doable for others in our profession.
Oh, I so love this. I think the proof is really in the pudding. If you can take someone with your background, being such a hard driver, definitely never before was that stuff on your radar, to do this almost 180, come to the other side and value it to the degree of wanting to teach it, that speaks volumes. So for those of you out there listening, if you were like us, I put myself in the same boat as you, of this stuff never being on my radar before, having come to it by being humbled by something that just was so painful and debilitating that we have to find other ways. The old ways aren't working anymore. I hope that helps open people's minds. Just be curious. Like, maybe there's a little something here. And let's now start diving more into, for those of us who like data and numbers, how about sharing just a bit of the research that demonstrates the benefits of mindfulness and meditation? I guess we should also maybe clarify the difference, because I know they kind of get lumped together and they're not really, there's overlap, but let's start with the defining it and then giving some numbers for those of us who love numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, the concept of mindfulness is really this way of being in the present moment. Okay. So this is taking ourselves out of doing mode, which is where so many of us in the veterinary profession spend most of our time, right? Going from one consult to another, one appointment to another, doing our medical records, calling the clients back, talking to a team member, blah, 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 and on it goes. So very much a doing, sometimes almost on autopilot. And when not in that doing mode, a lot of veterinarians spend their time in worry mode. So projecting into the future, thinking about the future, what's going to happen tomorrow? What about the next consult? What about my next surgery? Or ruminating on the past. What happened with that case? I can't believe that client said that to me. That team member looked at me funny today, and replaying it over and over and over. And the theme here being that the individual is not fully present to what is happening right in front of them. So mindfulness is this practice of being fully present to our thoughts, our feelings, our physical sensations and experiences, like integrating all of those in the present moment. Mm-hmm. So when people say, be more mindful, or I'd like to be more mindful, be mindful of this, it really is tuning in with that awareness to what is happening right in front of you, not what you think might happen tomorrow or what happened 2 weeks ago, but what is happening right in front of you.
So even right now, those listening, you can do it right now listening to the podcast, is just notice your I like starting with my physical body. That's my easiest entry point. I'm like, oh, how's my body feel? I feel a little cold, or right now I feel energized, or, how's your breathing? What's the depth of your breathing? And then you can notice, what do you see? Like, I see you on the screen, and I can see the light above me, and just the little things. What do we hear? Like, the sensations and our senses are one entry point. How do you like to get mindful? What works for you?
Yeah, no, I think those really, really great cues. And for me, it's definitely similarly tuning into the body sensations. So doing a quick body scan, definitely tuning into the sensation of breath. There's different ways that we can connect, like just tuning into our senses in general. So a lot of people will talk about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 mindfulness exercise, where you think about 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Again, just tuning into your senses. If you are tuning into your senses and that which is your current sensorial experience, it's not possible for you to be anywhere else. You must be inhabiting your body to experience those senses. So that's a great jumping point as well.
Fabulous. And then how do you differentiate mindfulness from meditation?
So meditation is essentially a form of mindfulness. So when we use meditation to sit in stillness and to focus our awareness on our present experience, whether it's noticing or counting the breath, or tuning into the sounds around us, or tuning into certain sensations in our body, tuning into our thoughts that are coming up as we sit there. All of that is meant to, again, bring awareness into the moment. It's just done with intention, and generally seated or laying down, sometimes guided. So sometimes there's, a voice that is guiding you through cues, as to what to focus on, with the whole goal of keeping our awareness in that present moment. So you might notice thoughts that come up, and that's expected. They're supposed to come up. What we don't want is for you to get pulled into that thought and into the story that goes along with the thought, or the thought leads to, the to-do list for tomorrow, or the conversation that you had yesterday. And again, that is going to happen because we're all human. And so that's normal. What we want to do within that meditation practice is to just redirect our awareness, our attention back to our present moment. So whatever you're using as an anchor within your meditation practice, it might be a voice, it might be your breath, it might be a mantra that you're repeating over and over and over. Every time your mind wanders and you bring it back, that is building that mindfulness muscle, because mindfulness is governed by our prefrontal cortex. And to wire and fire and build up that prefrontal cortex part of our brain, we need to flex that muscle of redirecting our attention back to the present moment. And meditation is just one way of practicing that redirection of attention into the present moment.
I love it so much how you describe it. It's so perfectly said. And for those listening, I think a big mistake people make is they'll say to me, oh, I tried meditation, but I failed. I can't do it because I kept thinking about other things. And I say, no, that means you're doing it right. The whole thing about meditation, even those of us who've meditated for 20 years will still have the same phenomenon happen, which is I'm trying to focus on my breath. I feel my breath. Oh, I'm thinking about a snack. Uh-oh, that snack would be yummy. Oh, wait, come back to the breath. The catching yourself thinking and coming back to your anchor, that's the practice. That means you're like, if you're thinking about like lifting weights, you just did a rep. That was rep 1. Perfect. So all you need to do is practice returning. We should just call it returning. I think that if people know that means you're winning, you're doing it right, you got a gold star, you're meditating correctly, even if you never have a clear mind. Like nobody has that. Maybe the Dalai Lama. I don't know. I haven't asked him. But I just want to frame that for people. And I appreciate how you described it. I think it sums it up perfectly. And let's talk a little more about then the research. Like, what do we know? What's the data show?
Yeah. So, as with many things in veterinary medicine, we're a wee bit behind our human healthcare counterparts. So the research that we have in vet medicine specific to mindfulness and meditation is small but growing, which is wonderful to see. There have been a few research studies at different institutions. One of them was in the Bahamas in St. Kitts, and there's been some research out of Australia that has demonstrated that mindfulness workshops, either over a 2-day period or a several week period where people come together, they learn about mindfulness, they practice some of these techniques, that those workshops do have the ability to reduce people's perceptions of stress, and to enhance that sense of calm. And so, they're a little bit biased research studies because we don't have a great control group. And intuitively, of course, if you took all the faculty and staff at Ross University and said, hey, go attend this 2-day workshop on mindfulness, of course, they're going to feel better after the 2 days of time off of work to do this mindfulness training. But it really is encouraging to see that, university, and some other practice settings are investigating these tools and strategies and trying to do some, research to demonstrate benefits. What we've also seen is that, associated with that perception of decreased stress, there are some studies looking at mindfulness strategies that have also reduced physiologic indications of cortisol in the body. So that one research study that looked at the 2-day mindfulness workshop, they did measure levels of cortisol in the saliva at the beginning of the workshop and at the end of the workshop, and they did see a reduction in those cortisol levels. Similarly, at our, home base, NC State University, they also did a breathing exercise, a mindfulness breathing exercise for 4th-year veterinary students who were going into their space surgeries. These are students who haven't done many surgeries, and now they're doing surgeries on live animals that are owned by clients. And so they took a group of students who went through this breathing exercise for 5 minutes and compared them to a group of students who didn't. And those students also had lower levels of, molecules in their saliva that were indicative of stress, as well as better perceived levels of stress. So their stress levels also went down according to how they perceived them to be. So there's definitely some benefits there. There's been a few other studies as well. One of them in particular looked at students who were practicing mindfulness. They had, again, regular meetups where they learned about mindfulness techniques, and then they had the opportunity to practice on their own, and they logged how often they were practicing. And one of the interesting findings from that study was that those students who had pre-existing depression and anxiety symptoms that were higher than that of average, they had more benefits when practicing mindfulness strategies or techniques at least once a week compared to those students who did not have any pre-existing mental illnesses. So it's encouraging for people like me who do live with mental illness that we can look at this and say, gosh, this really could be beneficial for my mental health and, for managing my stress. So there's, burgeoning research in the veterinary space and, of course, more research in the general human and human healthcare space.
Well, fabulous. For those who are even nerdier than we are, you can just, again, Google Scholar, you can read about the research that's done, like you said, at the population at large, aside from vet med. And there's just so much, it's overwhelming. And as a psychotherapist, it's a foundational starting point, because how do we talk about your emotions if you don't have awareness of what they are? So, think about this compass point that comes out of us. It tells us when we're on our true north, when we're living according to our values, when we're living life on purpose. Mindfulness and self-awareness is just so critical for that. So yes, the data also supports it in so many ways. So feel free to nerd out. And I wanted to take us, down the path of those of us who are more, what's the word? Maybe, I don't know if the word's cynical or weary of this or just don't get it. How do you encourage people who may not be hip to meditation or mindfulness to consider giving it a try?
Such a good question. Skeptical would be another word I would use. I often title my sessions on mindfulness for veterinary skeptics, because the majority of us in the profession would fall into that category. And I used to be one of them. And, you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, Crystal, where you said, we tend to be very science-minded people, that this feels like woo-woo and show me the research and show me the data. And the good news is there is tons of data on humans at large and the benefits of mindfulness and meditation. And so I usually direct people to that, and show them all of the research as you alluded to, where there's, better tolerance of pain. There's enhanced immune system. And we know that because we've measured cytokines in meditators and non-meditators in response to administering the flu virus to people, looking at things like blood pressure regulation, heart disease risk, emotional regulation, mental health. I mean, there are so many research benefits. And I also do tend to direct people to our human healthcare comparisons. So we know, based on a lot of research now that's been done looking at mindfulness strategies among human healthcare professionals, that there are benefits in preventing burnout, in having increased self-care practices, in having improved patient satisfaction and patient care. Because as you said, if you are fully present and aware of what's coming up for you, your emotions, the emotions of the people around you, and so on, you're more tuned in to what they need and to what you're actually doing in your job and how you're communicating with people, how you're communicating with yourself, noticing what you need in order to not get burnt out, or noticing when you're burnt out and need to take a step back. So again, there's so much evidence to demonstrate that this really is a mechanism for taking people out of autopilot, off the hamster wheel, away from the workaholistic tendencies that we so gravitate towards as veterinary professionals, and into this place of awareness and honoring our needs and, practicing this, because there is functional MRI, neurophysiologic research, to back this up. So I do focus on the science. I do focus as well on the neurophysiologic pathways. So everyone learned neurology and neurophysiology in vet school, and we know the different portions of our brains, and we know what they're responsible for. So we can understand that we've got, the brainstem, which is like our basic functioning. We've got, the amygdala and our limbic system. So that processes our emotions and our memories. That is often what triggers our brainstem. We this is how we survived, right? There was a threat, and we knew based on our memories, if there's a threat, I need to run, I need to fight, I need to do something to survive. And, from there, we cultivated our, cortex and then our prefrontal cortex, which allows us the opportunity to really look at our experiences, to take a step back and say, oh, that's a threat, but is it really a threat? No, wait, that's just someone crossing the street. It's not a large, brown grizzly bear coming to attack me, or whatever it might be. And then the prefrontal cortex, even more so the higher reasoning to really look at, what was it about this situation that led me to think that? And how can I, look at my thoughts and feelings as they're coming up in this situation and maybe counter them in some way. So as human beings, we have this capability of really examining our thoughts and our feelings, which is not something that other species, have the ability to do. And that allows us to have a little bit of space from our experience to when there is a previous something that we perceived as a threat to come up, such as an angry client or a team member that disagrees with us, that we can have that prefrontal cortex awareness of taking a step back and noticing, gosh, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough in this job, or that I'm being questioned, and I'm having the feeling of embarrassment or frustration, and I'm having the sensation of my heart pounding. And before we just yell at that other person and have a reaction, we can take a step back and we can respond with inquiry or, kindness or compassion or questions, whatever it might be. So it really is transformative for me, not just in terms of all the research around burnout and self-care and patient care and so on, but in my interactions and relationships with others, and myself. So that's really what I hone in on. And of course, sharing my personal experience and how much it has shaped my life is helpful too.
It's such a beautiful story. How would you describe the most common entry points? Like if someone's listening thinking, I would love some of these benefits. Okay. I have trouble with my emotional regulation. I find that I get really worked up with certain clients, then I get exhausted and burned out, or I don't really have much awareness around my boundaries and I'm trying to figure out where they are, but my mind's so full of thoughts of the future and the past that I can't even sort it out. So this mindfulness thing sounds pretty good. I'm willing to give it a try. How could I get started? What are those first steps?
Yeah. Well, I'm so interested to hear what you coach and counsel people on too. For me, it's always about meeting the person where they're at. And so I think a lot of people's resistance stems too from like, oh my gosh, my life is so busy. And now you're telling me I have to like sit in meditation. And maybe just the meditation doesn't resonate with that individual. So I think first it's about honoring like what would fit into their current life situation, what resonates most with them. And so that might be as little as, taking a deep breath before calling a client on the phone or going into a consult with a client. It might mean in the morning when you show up at your work and you before you get out of the car and go into the practice, that you sit and do a quick meditation or mindfulness exercise for about 5 minutes to just ground and center yourself. Notice how you're feeling in your body. Notice the, thoughts that are coming up for you. Notice any feelings that you're experiencing, and then, process and proceed from there. And then it can be as big as, sitting in meditation and having a more formal practice that you do every single morning or every single evening for 10, 15, even 20 minutes a day. So really, I think the very first thing that I usually tell people to do is to download an app, because I think that that's the easiest way to kind of jump in, where you have someone guiding you, you have a little bit of direction in terms of like understanding the practice and not jumping too far into something that feels really, off or different. Some of these apps, they really make it tangible and relatable to every single human. And so that's usually a great starting point.
We have a very similar approach. I agree with meeting people where they are. And I think a big barrier, and I'd love to hear about your thoughts on barriers as well. Barriers to entry or sustainability are things like feeling like there's a right way to do it and you're not doing it the right way. Maybe trying something that you think you should do instead of what works for you. Because again, we say like with exercise, what's the best exercise? The one you'll do. Totally. Same thing with mindfulness and meditation, right? So I'm also a big fan of using apps or YouTube videos. Often with clients, I'll give them a variety, a little menu. I say, try them all out. Tell me which one's your favorite. And that gives me an idea of where to go next. So I think that really being curious about yourself, trying on different styles of mindfulness and seeing what works for you at this stage in your life, because different stages will require different forms. Yeah. And that barrier of saying, I don't have time or I don't know the right way to do it. To really remember, like you said, the smallest bit counts. One drop at a time makes a difference. So I'd like to ask you barriers to maintaining a mindfulness practice, and then maybe weaving that into how we could encourage teams to do this. As I'm thinking, and we're talking about us as individuals, but imagine if we could have entire vet med teams all kind of supporting each other and taking those mindful moments.
I love that. I wholeheartedly agree with the barriers that you described. So mindset would be the biggest one for me initially, like this feeling of that's not for me, that's too woo-woo, so normalizing it, showing the research. There are so many famous people who meditate on a regular basis, and maybe we don't really identify with those people, but we might aspire to be like them. So a lot of lead successful executives, a lot of very famous athletes, Steph Curry and LeBron James is a meditator, a lot of famous performers, Katy Perry, Oprah Winfrey. There are individuals who do this, and they do this for a reason because they know that it helps them to be successful and, to do the difficult work that many of them are doing as well. So there's that. Definitely the time we've touched on already. And again, that's where maybe it's not 15 minutes, maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 5 breaths, making it as amenable for you as possible. And then I loved what you said earlier. This is a big one as well that I hear a lot is, I'm not doing this right. I've tried it and this didn't work for me, because my mind is just too busy and that sort of thing. And it's like, newsflash, you are no different than anybody else. Everybody's mind is busy. Meditation is not about clearing the mind. Meditation is about welcoming the thoughts, but not getting sucked into them, noticing them, and then letting go and redirecting back to the present moment. So like you shared earlier, every single rep, that we're doing is, that redirection of awareness. And for me, I'm happy when my mind is super busy and I have more opportunities to redirect to the present moment.
Love it. How about getting teams to do this? What's your experience there of getting buy-in across the group and the power of that?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of power in group dynamics in terms of, positive peer pressure. So I think if you're hearing a lot of other people talk about it and doing it and modeling it, then that can be very beneficial. I've definitely worked in practices where certain specialty services, so I worked at one practice where the ophthalmology service would take a few minutes out of their day to close the door, dim the lights, and listen to a meditation together and practice together. So it can be as formal as we carve out this time to do this meditation practice together. It can be as simple as cueing each other, like if we see that someone is maybe, on the hamster wheel, on autopilot, whatever it is, to just cue them, hey, did you want to take a minute to step outside? And getting outside, taking a breath of fresh air, noticing the sensation of the sun on their face, so supporting each other that way to do those things. Mindfulness, as we shared earlier, is so much about our awareness and noticing. And we often don't allow ourselves any breaks in the day to notice anything other than the work that we have in front of us. So what about in rounds as we are talking about patients or before we launch into sharing patient information with each other, that we check in to say, even if just in one word, how are you feeling today? Or use one word to describe, how you're feeling today. And then people have a moment to just stop, reflect, and then share. And not only does that give that person that mindful moment to take note of where they are, it also gives the rest of the team a little bit of a context for how others in the group are doing that day and where they might be coming from. Because if you hear someone say anxious, that's maybe an opportunity to circle back with them at a later time.
Lovely. All the team building. It's such a nice team building exercise and a way to really create more of that cohesion. So as we're coming down the home stretch, the time just flies by. It's been amazing as we talk about mindfulness where the time goes. Let's leave off today with your top 3 takeaways, what you want people to end this podcast, saying, aha, that's very important. I'm pinning it in my mental to-do list or notes to follow up on. And also want you to include in that where people can find you if they have questions and want to know more about your work.
Oh, thanks, Crystal. I know. I can't believe where the time has gone either. I feel like we could, have talked so much longer about so many different things. 3 takeaways that I would share with people. Number 1, mindfulness literally has transformative benefits, not just for individuals, but for teams. When we can all make an effort to have that mindful awareness, to respond rather than react, to take care of ourselves when we know that we need to take care of ourselves. It truly has trickle-down effects, and not just for ourselves and our team, but for our patients and our clients as well. The second takeaway is that meditation really is for everyone and it's accessible to everyone. So there are a plethora of free apps out there that you can download or get on YouTube, like you shared, Crystal, and download some videos or audio files to listen to. This is something that you can do anywhere at any time because you can also simply tune into your breath, tune into your body. How are you feeling? How are you breathing? What are you thinking? How are you feeling and so on. And then the third takeaway would be, we didn't touch on this a whole lot, but I think it's an important point, is that if you think meditation is not for you, for whatever reason, you try it, you don't like it, it just doesn't resonate, find another mindful activity that you can stick to every day. So whether that's yoga, whether that is running, whether it's knitting or crocheting or cross-stitching or gardening, any activity that you can immerse yourself in and be completely aware of your sensations, your breathing, what's coming up for you, having that awareness and redirecting thoughts. If they, pull you away, somewhere, then that's your mindfulness activity. It doesn't have to be meditation as much as the research is often focused on that. Do what works for you, because as you said, Crystal, it's like exercise. The very best form is the one that you enjoy doing and that you do on the regular. So that's my final takeaway. And as for where people can find me, I am on all the social media channels for the most part. So Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram are where I spend most of my time. And then I've got my website, marieholowaychuk.com, where you can learn more about me. And then, of course, the resource website that Crystal mentioned earlier, revivingvetmen.com. I would love it if you would check it out and tell me what you think and share it with others if you feel like there's beneficial stuff there. So thank you.
All right. Marie, thank you so much for being on with us today. I've so enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.